Hello there, my dear. Before we begin, how has your day been? Really, how has it been? Did you get a moment for yourself today, even just 5 minutes to close your eyes, to take a breath, to let the world soften for a little while? I hope so. But if not, that's all right. You're here now. And here, you don't have to hold on to anything. Not your to-do list, not your worries, not even the edges of your thoughts. Let's just float together for a little while. Tonight, I want to take you somewhere very far away from this moment, but not too far that you can't imagine yourself there. Not too far that you can't almost hear the faint rustle of silk or the hush of footsteps across cold stone. Close your eyes if you want to, or just let your mind wander. And picture this A door, not an ordinary door, a red door, not bright, cheerful red. No, this red is deeper, older, like lacquer worn thin by the weight of years, like a color heavy with silence. It's the kind of door that doesn't open for just anyone. And once it closes, it rarely opens again. Not for the same person, not for the same heart. That door belongs to a place called the Forbidden City. Perhaps you've heard of it. Once long ago, it was the very heart of China's empire, a palace so vast it had cities inside it, walls so high they seemed to hold up the sky itself. And inside those walls lived women, thousands of them, some born to noble houses, some from humble homes, all chosen for one reason: because someone thought they were beautiful enough, gentle enough, young enough to please the emperor. Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to step through a door, knowing you could never go back, not tomorrow, not in 10 years, not ever? Imagine a girl, 14 maybe, sometimes younger, her hair brushed smooth, tied with trembling fingers beneath heavy pins, her robe arranged just so, carried through that red door in a litter draped with silk, her feet never touching the earth, her head bowed, her hands folded, her heart racing so loud she's sure everyone can hear it. She's heard stories, of course. Haven't we all heard stories before we walk into something we don't fully understand? Stories of golden halls, of silk so soft it feels like air against skin, of gardens where peacocks cry and courtiers laugh, stories of the emperor handsome kind, or cold, unknowable as the moon. But no one tells her the other stories, the ones about women who never leave their rooms again, the ones about punishments so silent no one speaks of them afterward. The ones about how you can live for decades and never once hear your name called again. The door closes behind her, not with a slam. It's too heavy, too well made for such things. But she feels it in her chest like something pressing down, feels it in her bones, feels it in the way the light changes suddenly smaller. One moment she was part of the wide breathing world. The next, she is not. Behind those red doors, time behaves differently. Outside, seasons shift. People grow up, grow old, grow distant. Inside, days stretch like silk unspooling endlessly across a cold floor. Sunlight crawls across stones slow as breath. Voices stay soft, steps stay light, faces stay blank. And the girl, she begins to change too. Not all at once. No change here is slow. Like water smoothing stone. First her name disappears. No one calls her the name her mother gave her. Not anymore. Now she is a number, a rank, a title so low it barely exists on the ledgers of the palace. She learns how to walk, how to bow precisely, how to smile delicately, how to speak softly, how to disappear into silk and shadow, how to survive quietly, Do you remember the first time you learned how to disappear? Not with your body, but with your spirit. Do you remember realizing how quickly we're taught to shrink ourselves to fit into spaces never meant for us? She learns. She learns quickly. Because here, mistakes aren't corrected, they're erased. Above her, the emperor lives like a god. Below her, the servants live like ghosts. And in between are the concubines, dozens, hundreds, all of them waiting for something they may never receive. A glance, a summons, a single night beneath red silk and heavy silence, because that one night could change everything. Or it could change absolutely nothing. So the girl waits. She sits behind paper screens, stitches tiny flowers onto pale cloth, listens to the wind sigh against painted doors, listens to footsteps passing, always passing, listens for laughter that does not belong to her, and wonders, how did I come here? And will I ever leave? But no one answers. Not the wind, not the footsteps, not the door. Because once you pass through that red door, it does not open again. Not for you. Are you still here with me, my dear? Still cozy, still safe. Sometimes I wonder, has anyone ever taught you how to survive something quietly? Not the loud, brave kind of survival we read about in stories. No, I mean the kind where you shrink yourself small enough to fit inside a life you didn't ask for. Because that's what she had to learn first. The girl behind the red doors. She had no map for this place. No one handed her a guidebook titled, How to Endure When Your Heart Belongs to a Life You'll Never Live Again. Instead, she learned by watching, by listening, by noticing all the things that weren't said out loud. The first lesson: be careful where you look. Eyes are dangerous here. If you lift them too high, if they meet the wrong gaze, if they hold a question for too long, you might offend someone far above your station. Or worse, someone who enjoys watching you fall. So she learned to keep her eyes low, soft, empty. Do you remember the first time you realized looking someone in the eye wasn't always safe? The way it feels to swallow your curiosity, to let yourself disappear just a little bit for your own protection. The second lesson: silence is survival. In this place, words are like silk threads, beautiful, but so easily tangled. One wrong word spoken in the wrong ear could unravel everything. So she learned how to nod, just enough, how to smile without teeth, how to agree, even when every part of her wanted to scream. It wasn't weakness. It was wisdom. The kind of wisdom women have carried quietly for centuries. The third lesson: everything is watching you, not just the people, not just the servants, the walls, the doors, even the floor beneath your feet. They remember. They carry whispers better than any mouth could. Who stood here? Who knelt there? Who disappeared and was never spoken of again? So she learned how to move like smoke, softly, without ripples, without leaving a trace. She learned how to bow, exactly the right depth, no more, no less. How to hold a teacup as if it were spun from glass and watched by gods. How to walk with steps so quiet they might as well be shadows. Have you ever had to teach yourself how to make less noise in the world? How to occupy less space? Not because you wanted to, but because it was safer that way. The fourth lesson: beauty isn't yours. It belongs to your rank, to your station, to the emperor's whim. Her hair wasn't hers anymore. It belonged to the women who dressed it. Her face wasn't hers anymore. It belonged to the powders and paints. Her clothes weren't hers anymore. They belonged to the hierarchy. Silk, if you pleased the right person. Rough cotton, if you didn't. Even her body wasn't hers anymore. It belonged to the chance of bearing a son, to the rotation of nights spent hoping for a summons that might never come. She learned to decorate herself carefully, to wear beauty like armor and like chains. The fifth lesson: forget softness, forget warmth, forget the girl you used to be. Here kindness could be mistaken for weakness, friendship for foolishness, dreams for rebellion. So she learned to let go of laughter, let go of hope, let go of the part of her that still wanted to run barefoot through fields, through rain, through freedom. Instead, she learned patience. She learned how to kneel for hours without shifting, how to endure days without hearing her own voice aloud, how to sleep with one ear open for footsteps, how to wait for anything to change. Have you ever felt that kind of waiting? Not the kind with an end in sight, but the kind where you start to wonder if waiting has become your whole life, where you wonder if one day you'll forget what you're waiting for entirely. It's a quiet kind of sadness, one that doesn't cry loudly, one that just settles over your shoulders like a heavy shawl you can't seem to take off. She learned to carry that weight because there was no choice, because to survive behind the red doors was to become smaller, quieter, invisible, until someone decided otherwise, and so she did. She became what the palace wanted, what the hierarchy demanded, what the silence required. But somewhere deep beneath all of it, the girl remained, still listening, still watching, still wondering. Would there be a way out? Or had the lessons already turned her into something else entirely? For now, she kept her head low, her words soft, her footsteps lighter than breath. For now, she survived. Are you still here, my dear? Still listening, I wonder? Have you ever sat in a room full of women surrounded by conversation, yet somehow felt entirely alone? That's a particular kind of loneliness, isn't it? The kind where words pass by like clouds, but none of them seem to touch you. Where smiles stretch across faces like silk, across cold marble, smooth, beautiful, but never truly warm. Inside the Forbidden City, there were so many women, so many faces behind painted makeup, behind silk curtains, behind endless layers of etiquette and rules. Yet somehow, it might as well have been the loneliest place in the world. Because here, silence wasn't just a habit. It was survival. It was protection. It was a kind of armor you had to wear even when it made you ache inside. At first, she didn't understand. The girl behind the red doors, she thought she would make friends. Other girls just like her. Surely they would laugh together. Surely they would share secrets or tears or quiet moments under the moon. But no. No one came to sit beside her and ask about her hometown. No one asked if she missed her mother or her little brother, or the fields where she used to run. No one leaned in to whisper hopes or dreams. Instead, there were glances, quick, calculated, measuring. There were smiles, polite, polished, practiced, and there was silence. Not the peaceful kind, not the soft, comforting hush of dusk falling over quiet streets. No. This silence buzzed beneath every surface. It hung in the air like the scent of incense too long burned. It pressed down on shoulders like invisible hands. Because here, every woman was both your mirror and your rival. Every woman might one day stand between you and the emperor's gaze. Every woman might one day hold the power you dreamed of having. or hold the secret that could unravel everything you'd carefully built. Have you ever known that feeling of being surrounded, yet isolated, of learning to measure your words, not for kindness, but for safety? Here a compliment could be a weapon. A gift could hide poison, literal or otherwise. A laugh could signal alliance or mockery. Nothing was what it seemed. So the girl learned. She learned to speak less, to listen more, to keep her thoughts folded neatly like the silks in her chest of drawers. She learned to offer smiles the way one offers tea, gracefully, politely, with no hint of depth beneath the surface. She learned that women here didn't share their hearts. They shared glances, rumors, warnings passed in the tilt of a fan, the lowering of eyes, the careful placement of a hairpin. Friendship wasn't impossible, but it was rare. And even then it came wrapped in layers of caution. Sometimes, in the quietest moments, one girl might slip a note beneath another's door, a poem, a small kindness, a thread of connection too fragile to name aloud. But even that could vanish overnight with a single summons, with a single mistake, with a single word spoken to the wrong person. Women disappeared here, not always in the literal sense, but in spirit, in voice, in hope. One day they might smile, the next their eyes would be hollow, their rooms would grow colder, their names would fade from conversation, and no one would ask where they had gone. Have you ever watched someone slowly slip away from themselves, not through tragedy, not through cruelty, but through silence, through the slow, quiet wearing down of their spirit, until all that remained was obedience wrapped in silk? That's what the girl learned to recognize, the signs of vanishing, the women who moved like shadows, who spoke only when spoken to, who had once been bright, and now were dim. Sometimes she wondered, would anyone notice if she vanished too? Would anyone ask where the girl from the province of soft winds and quiet rivers had gone? But of course, they wouldn't. Because here, women didn't disappear with cries. They disappeared beneath layers of silence, of etiquette, of expectation. Still, sometimes, in the softest moments when lantern light turned everything golden, she would catch a glance across a courtyard, a look that said, I see you. I'm still here too. And in that glance there was a quiet promise. We survive this together, even if together only means knowing we're not entirely alone. It wasn't much, but it was enough for now. Are you still here, my dear? Still resting, still listening, I wonder? Have you ever found yourself in a quiet little battle with someone, not the kind with shouting or harsh words, but the kind where smiles hide sharp edges and kindness comes with strings? That's the kind of war they fought behind the red doors, not with swords or armies, but with whispers, with glances, with silence sharpened into something deadly. You see, in a world where women had so little, every scrap of attention, every fleeting moment of favor became a battlefield, and the enemy was often dressed just like you, painted just like you, waiting just like you. A glance too long in the emperor's direction, a compliment from the wrong eunuch, a robe in a color someone else thought belonged to them. Such small things, such fragile things. But here, they mattered, because favor wasn't just affection. It was safety. It was survival. It meant better food, better rooms, silk instead of rough linen, warmth instead of cold corridors, protection instead of punishment. And so the women fought, Not openly, not always, but in ways so quiet, so subtle, you might not even realize you were under attack until it was far too late. Have you ever been in a room where the real conversation wasn't happening out loud? Where every compliment had a second meaning? Where every smile had teeth hidden beneath it? That's how it was for her. For the girl learning how to survive. She watched. She learned how one woman might accidentally spill tea on another's best gown. How one might forget to send an invitation to a gathering. How rumors could slip like smoke beneath closed doors. She isn't as young as she looks, you know. I heard she spoke out of turn. I wonder why the Emperor hasn't called on her lately. And who started these whispers? No one ever knew. No one ever admitted. But everyone understood the rules of the game. Don't rise too quickly. Don't shine too brightly. Don't trust too easily. Because one woman's gain was another's loss. A new favorite meant someone else had fallen. A promotion meant someone else had been passed by. And resentment? Well, resentment bloomed here like flowers in spring, silent, inevitable, beautiful in a way that hurt to look at. Some women learned to fight back, not with fists, but with gifts, with alliances, with carefully placed words and carefully chosen ears. They learned how to flatter without seeming false, how to defend without seeming defensive, how to win without seeming to want to. Do you know that feeling of having to outthink someone just to stay safe? Of realizing you're playing a game you never agreed to, but you can't afford to lose. She learned. She learned fast. She learned that even her friendships were dangerous, that the woman who shared tea with her today might trade her secrets for favor tomorrow. That kindness could be a mask. That softness could be used against you. And so she kept her heart guarded. She kept her words measured. She kept her trust tucked away like a precious jewel hidden beneath layers of silk. But even so, there were moments when another girl's hand brushed hers, offering a stolen smile. Moments when laughter escaped quick and breathless before they remembered to be careful. Moments when, for just a heartbeat, they weren't rivals. They were simply girls, lonely, afraid, hoping for something better. And then the moment would pass, the mask would return, the game would resume. Have you ever had to smile at someone who didn't wish you well, just to keep the peace? Isn't it exhausting? Isn't it lonely? To fight battles no one else can see. That was the war behind the red doors, a war of waiting, of watching, of learning when to speak and when to fall silent, of knowing that even the softest words could leave bruises, and even the gentlest hands could push you from the Emperor's sight. Still, she survived, one careful step at a time, one polite nod at a time, one breathless smile at a time, and somewhere beneath all that strategy, she carried a quiet wish that one day there would be a place where women didn't have to fight each other to survive, where kindness didn't have to be a weapon, where trust could stretch wide and soft like the sky instead of curling up small like a secret. But for now, she fought the only way she could, softly, silently, carefully, with a grace so quiet no one could see the war at all. Are you still here with me, my dear? Still tucked in, still letting your breath soften, letting the world outside drift further and further away? I wonder, have you ever waited for someone's attention longer than you knew you should? Waited even when your heart whispered that they might never turn to look? It's a quiet ache, isn't it? that hope you hold small as a bird, cupped in your palms, even as you feel it slowly losing its warmth. Behind the red doors, that was the ache that followed every woman. Because here, everything depended on the eyes of one man, the Emperor, a man who might see you or might not, a man who might summon you or might forget your face the moment you bow and leave the room. Every woman waited for his gaze, for that moment when his eyes might fall upon her, might pause, might linger just long enough to change her life. And so they prepared, night after night, hour after hour. They painted their faces in soft whites and reds. They pinned their hair with trembling hands beneath ornaments of jade and gold. They chose their silks carefully, pale enough to seem innocent, rich enough to seem desirable. They practiced their smiles in polished mirrors, making sure they looked soft, but never too bold. And then they waited. Have you ever waited like that for a message, for a phone call, for someone to see you in a crowd and walk toward you instead of past you, for someone to choose you over all the others? It wears on you, doesn't it? That waiting. It seeps into your bones. It makes the world feel heavier than it should. In the Forbidden City, days were measured by who was called and who wasn't. Nights were measured by footsteps. Would they stop outside your door? Would the eunuch knock softly and speak your name? Or would he pass by, leaving only silence in his wake? Women waited with lamps lit low. They sat with combs laid neatly beside them, with slippers pointed toward the door just in case. They waited with hearts folded small, breath held quiet, waiting to be seen, waiting to be wanted, waiting to matter for one night. Because one night could mean everything. One night could lift you from shadow to light. One night could bring a child, could bring favor, could bring protection. But more often, the night passed, and the door never opened, and no one called your name. Can you imagine how it feels to dress yourself in hope each evening, only to undress again in silence, to light a lantern for someone who never comes, to hold your breath for footsteps that never stop for you? It's not anger that settles in. It's not even sadness. It's something softer, something quieter, a kind of fading, like color washed out by too many rains, like petals falling from a flower no one picked in time. She learned to wait, this girl behind the red doors. She learned how to hold her posture just so, how to keep her eyes lowered but not too low, how to let her laughter sound like bells, soft and sweet but never foolish, how to let longing settle in her bones without turning to bitterness. She waited and waited and waited, and some nights, as the lamps burned down and shadows stretched long across the lacquered floors, she wondered if he even knew she existed, if he could pick her from a lineup of painted faces, if he remembered the province she came from, the name she carried before she became one of so many. But there were no answers, only silence, only waiting. Have you ever felt invisible? Not because you wanted to hide, but because someone never learned how to see you. It's a peculiar kind of grief, soft, lingering. The grief of being overlooked, of being passed by, of offering up the best parts of yourself, your kindness, your beauty, your hope, only to watch them disappear into the air, unnoticed. Still, she kept waiting, because what else was there to do? Behind those red doors, hope was the only currency left to women like her. Hope and patience. Hope and silence. And beneath it all, a question she never dared speak aloud. What if the eyes you long for never look your way? What if you spend a lifetime preparing, perfecting, waiting for someone who was never going to see you? Still, she dressed each night, lit her lamp, smoothed her silks, practiced her smile, not because she believed, but because hope is a habit hard to break, even when it hurts, even when it lingers longer than it should, even when it fades quietly, like breath in cold air. Are you still with me, my dear? Still resting, still letting your heart slow, your breath soften tonight's story. Like so many stories, a woman drifts toward love, or perhaps toward something that looks like love from a distance, something softer, something sadder, something more fleeting than anyone ever dares to admit aloud. Have you ever loved someone who could never love you the way you hoped? Have you ever given the very best of yourself, only to watch it fade unnoticed into someone else's shadow behind the red doors? Love wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't even something the women dared to name too often. Love here was a dangerous thing, a fragile, flickering thing, easily confused with favor, easily mistaken for something permanent, when it was anything but. Because behind these walls, affection was rationed out like pearls, and once given, it could just as easily be taken away. She had seen it. The girl behind the red doors, seen how a glance could turn a woman's world from gray to gold, seen how a night spent in silken shadows could lift one girl above the others. For a time. There were women who bloomed beneath the emperor's gaze, women who believed even for a little while that they were loved, that they were different, special, chosen. They wrote poems. They stitched tiny birds into cloth hopeful and bright. They walked lighter, spoke softer, carried themselves like queens. But even queens can fall, especially here. One wrong word, one new face, one shift in the wind of favor, and suddenly the woman who was adored becomes the woman no one speaks of. Rooms grow colder, doors close, servants bow less deeply. Whispers begin. She is no longer called. She has grown tiresome. Another has taken her place. Have you ever felt that slow unraveling? Not all at once, but little by little, like a thread pulled quietly from the hem of your life. Have you ever woken up and realized the person you thought you were to someone is no longer who you are? That's how it was for them, for the women who once held the emperor's favor and then did not. And it wasn't always cruel. Not exactly. Sometimes it was simply neglect, forgetting, moving on, replacing one face with another as easily as changing the flowers in a vase. Still, they waited. Still, they hoped, because hope is a habit hard to break. She saw it happen again and again, women who tried to reclaim what had been lost. New gowns, new songs, new dances beneath painted lanterns. But the emperor's eyes, once moved elsewhere, rarely returned, and hearts broke in silence, behind fans, behind curtains, behind polite smiles and bowed heads. Some women turned bitter, some turned inward, some turned their hurt into quiet cruelty toward others. But some simply faded, like ink left too long in the rain, like petals dropped from a branch too slender to hold them. Have you ever carried love that had nowhere to go? Carried it like a stone beneath your ribs? Heavy, quiet, unchanging? Have you ever whispered to yourself, maybe tomorrow, even when you already knew tomorrow would bring nothing new? That's what it was like here, to love, or to think you loved. Someone who would never love you back the way you needed. someone who belonged more to duty, to tradition, to power than to any woman's heart. And still, they waited. They smiled. They stitched new silks. They wrote new verses. Because sometimes, loving is simply what we do, even when we know better, even when it hurts, even when it cannot, will not end well. She watched. She learned. Not to give her heart too easily, not to mistake kindness for something deeper, not to confuse a glance for something lasting. But even so, there were nights she dreamed of being chosen, of being seen, of being loved, not just for a night or a title or a son, but for herself. And isn't that what we all want in the end, to be chosen, to be loved, to be remembered, not for what we offer, but simply for who we are? But behind the red doors, love was rarely kind and almost never safe. Still, she kept a small hope hidden like a letter never sent, because even here, even now, hope is harder to kill than you might think. Are you still with me, my dear? Still here, still resting, I wonder. Have you ever thought about the quiet heartbreaks women carry? Not the grand betrayals, not the loud, stormy endings, but the soft kind, the kind no one else even notices, the kind a mother carries beneath her ribs, hidden behind her smile, behind the red doors. There were many kinds of sorrow, but one of the sharpest was the sorrow of bearing daughters. You see, in a world ruled by men, daughters were a disappointment. Not to the women who bore them, no, never to them, but to the world that only counted sons, only valued heirs, only remembered women through the boys they gave birth to. And so, when a woman in the Forbidden City gave birth to a daughter, there were no celebrations, no silk banners hung from eaves, no gifts sent from distant provinces, no songs written in her name. There was only quiet, only a polite nod, only a servant's hurried footsteps carrying the news to someone who barely listened. Have you ever longed for something and known the world would never celebrate it with you? A small victory, a quiet joy, a love no one else seemed to understand. That's how it was for the women who bore daughters behind those walls. They loved them, of course. How could they not? Tiny hands, soft cries, eyes like mirrors of their own. But love here was a fragile, dangerous thing, because a daughter brought no favor, no power, no protection. Some were taken from their mothers the moment they could walk, raised in separate quarters, taught to be silent, taught to be small, taught that they mattered only in relation to the man they might someday marry, or the position they might someday hold. Some never knew their mothers at all, not truly. They passed each other in gardens like strangers, bowed to each other in courtyards like distant acquaintances. Have you ever been close to someone, yet felt an ocean stretch between you? Have you ever held love inside you, with nowhere to pour it? The women of the Forbidden City learned to carry that ache. They learned to kiss their daughters softly on the forehead, knowing it might be months before they saw them again. They learned to watch them grow from afar, to hear news in whispers. She is clever. She is obedient. She looks just like her mother did, but never. She is safe. Never. She is loved, because here, love wasn't guaranteed. Not for daughters, not for mothers, not for anyone. And so, these women learned to mourn quietly, to stitch their sorrow into the hems of silk robes, to fold it between the pages of poems no one else would read, to offer prayers beneath breath for daughters who would never know the fullness of their sacrifice. Have you ever prayed for someone, knowing they'd never know how much you carried them in your heart? That's what it was like here, to love a daughter in a place that valued sons, to wish for her joy, knowing how rare a thing that would be, to want her freedom, knowing how small her world would stay. Still, they loved them, even in silence, even in absence, even in the quiet ache of knowing their names might one day vanish from records entirely. Because a mother's love is stubborn like that. It grows in shadows, it blooms in cracks, it survives where nothing else can. She knew this, the girl behind the red doors, because once long ago she had been a daughter. No one celebrated either. And perhaps one day she would bear one of her own. And she wondered, would she have the courage to love her openly? Or would she learn as all the women here had learned? To love quietly, to love secretly, to love in ways no one else would ever see. And isn't that one of the quiet tragedies of being a woman, to carry so much love with nowhere safe to set it down? Still, they held it. Still, they loved. Because that's what women do, even behind locked doors, even behind guarded hearts, even when the world refuses to remember. Are you still here with me, my dear? Still safe, still quiet, still letting the world slip a little further away as we walk deeper into this old, quiet story together? I wonder, have you ever found a victory so small, so quiet that no one else even noticed? But you carried it with you like a secret treasure. The kind of victory that didn't earn applause, didn't change your title, didn't make your world any larger, but still, it mattered. Because it reminded you, you are still here. You are still yourself. Behind the red doors, grand victories did not belong to women. No woman here chose her own fate. No woman wrote her own future. But even in such a place, even where freedom was little more than a memory, there were still ways to win, ways to survive with a thread of dignity wrapped tight beneath silk sleeves, ways to keep something of yourself tucked safely away. She learned this, the girl behind the red doors, slowly, quietly, lesson by lesson, whisper by whisper. Some women found their victories in needles and thread, in the quiet mastery of silk pulled smooth beneath clever fingers, tiny stitches so perfect they seemed painted, not sewn, peonies blooming across collars, cranes lifting from the hems of skirts, waves curling soft and endless at the edges of robes. This was not mere decoration. It was proof of skill, of patience, of value. She is good with her hands, people would say in the soft spaces between conversations. She will never go hungry here, because talent, even small talent, could keep you safe, could make others think twice before casting you aside. Other women found their victories in music, in fingertips that coaxed longing from strings beneath pale moonlight, in songs so soft, so aching, they seemed to hang in the air like silk refusing to fade. Music was safe. Music was necessary. Music could make someone, anyone, pause, could make them remember you, if only for a moment longer. And there were women who found their power in knowing things, in listening when others thought them deaf, in watching when others thought them blind, in collecting secrets like beads on a string, slipping them into quiet corners of their minds until the time was right. They understood calendars as soldiers, understood battlefields. They tracked the shifting tides of favor with eyes sharper than any blade. They could speak of herbs, of medicines, of the way a dream might hint at danger yet to come. They became the ones others turned to quietly, in moments of doubt or fear. And though no one said it aloud, they were feared. They were respected. They survived. Have you ever been that person? The one others lean on, but rarely thank. The one who holds the threads together while standing quietly behind the scenes. It's not a loud kind of strength, but it's real. And sometimes, it's the only kind that lasts. She learned this too, that survival wasn't always about being seen. It wasn't always about being first or brightest or most beautiful. Sometimes, it was about knowing how to step back, how to wait, how to bend without breaking. And in these small ways, she found her victories. A poem written in secret folded beneath her pillow. A flower coaxed to bloom in a pot no one else had watered. A song hummed to herself beneath breath too soft for any ears but her own. Little things, tiny things, but hers, entirely hers. Moments stitched together like pearls on a thread. Proof that even here, even now, she could still make something gentle, something lasting, something that belonged to no one else. Have you ever known that kind of victory? The kind that lives small and quiet beneath your ribs? That no one claps for? That no one even notices? But you carry it anyway, because it reminds you who you are. Because it reminds you that you are still here. In the end, it wasn't always the boldest woman who survived, not the loudest, not even the most beautiful. It was the woman who understood where her power lived and how to keep it safe. The woman who knew when to speak and when to let silence speak louder. Who knew how to build small joys in secret corners. Who knew how to let her roots grow quietly beneath the stone. They didn't write poems for these women. They didn't carve their names in jade. But they lived, they endured, and they carried pieces of themselves the palace could never touch. And isn't that a kind of power worth having? Not the kind that commands rooms or changes laws, but the kind that holds you upright in the dark, that reminds you, gently, you are more than this place. You are more than these days. You are still yourself. She understood this now, the girl behind the red doors, and she held on to it, quietly, softly, like a secret stitched into the lining of her heart. Are you still here with me, my dear? Still safe, still soft, still letting your breath come slowly like waves against a quiet shore? I wonder, have you ever thought about what it means to grow old when no one is watching? Not the kind of growing old with family gathered close. Not the kind with birthday cakes and laughter photographs on the mantel, voices calling your name. No, I mean the quiet kind, the fading kind. The kind that happens behind doors no one opens anymore. Behind the red doors, women grew old every day, slowly, softly, without fanfare, without notice, without anyone marking the passing of their years except, perhaps, themselves. Once they had been girls, fresh-faced, hopeful, told they were beautiful, told they might catch the emperor's eye, told there was a future waiting if only they learned how to smile the right way, walk the right way, speak the right way. They had believed it, or at least, they had hoped. But years passed differently behind high walls. Seasons slip by without celebration. Birthdays go unspoken. Mirrors become less kind. Hands grow slower. Bones more fragile. And one day, you realize no one is looking at you anymore. Not with hunger, not with envy, not with anything at all. Have you ever felt yourself fading from someone's gaze? Have you ever noticed how invisibility creeps in? Not all at once, but inch by inch like shadows, lengthening at the end of day. She noticed. The girl behind the red doors, though she wasn't really a girl anymore. Not by then. She had become one of the quiet women who moved like ghosts through shaded courtyards, who sat beneath trees with blossoms that no longer opened for them, who stitched slowly, carefully, knowing no one would ever wear what they made, who fed the cats, who tended the plants, who spoke only when spoken to, and even then, only softly. They called them the still ones, because that's what they were. Still, unmoving, unchanging, unimportant. Once, they had been bright. Once, they had dreamed. Once, they had written poems about love, about longing, about the moonlight falling soft on lacquered floors. Now, they waited. Not for summons, not for favor, not for love. They waited for time to finish what the palace had begun. Have you ever wondered what becomes of women who are no longer wanted, not hated, not punished, just overlooked, forgotten? They do not rage, they do not weep, not where anyone can see. They shrink, they quiet, they fold themselves smaller and smaller until even their shadows seem thinner. But inside something still burns, a small flame, a memory of who they once were, a piece of themselves that refuses to be erased. She felt it, the girl who had waited so long to be seen, who had learned to survive with quiet hands and softer words, who had grown old in rooms where no one said her name anymore. And yet, each morning she still rose, she still smoothed her hair, she still chose her robes with care, not because anyone would notice, but because it mattered to her, because it reminded her. She was still here. She still walked the garden paths slowly now, still paused beneath the plum trees when they bloomed even if no one watched, still fed the cats who never forgot her face, still lit her lantern at night as though waiting for someone to find her by its glow. Have you ever kept a ritual, even when no one else understood why? Not out of habit, but out of hope. Hope that small things matter, that quiet things endure, that even in a world of forgetting, something of you might remain. They never wrote stories about women like her, the ones who grew old behind closed doors, the ones who faded softly into silence, carrying their names like secrets folded beneath silk. But she mattered. She mattered because she endured, because she refused to vanish entirely, because somewhere inside, she still remembered who she had been and who she still was. And isn't that a kind of quiet victory to survive, to hold on to yourself, to grow old, even when no one is watching, with a dignity no one can take away? Behind the red doors, the world forgot these women, but they did not forget themselves. And perhaps that is enough. Are you still here with me, my dear? Still safe, still listening, still letting the world slow down as though we're walking together beneath soft lantern light somewhere quiet, somewhere far from everything expected of us. I wonder, have you ever thought about how a life can end long before it truly ends, not with death, not with illness, but with exile, with silence, with being gently, carefully erased from the spaces where you once belonged? Behind the red doors, not every woman's ending came in tragedy. Not every ending was loud. Not every story closed with a cruel betrayal or a broken heart laid bare. Some ended far more quietly, in shadows, in silence, in the slow vanishing of one's name, from lips of one's footsteps, from corridors of one's face, from memory. You see, for women behind palace walls, there were only ever two endings: exile or silence. Some were sent away, not with force, not with violence, simply removed. dispatched to distant temples where the world would forget them in time, where heads were shaved, silk exchanged for plain robes, mirrors replaced with empty altars, where beauty was traded for piety, where laughter was folded away like old cloth, where even dreams grew quieter beneath stone eaves and prayer beads worn thin from repetition. There, far from the courts, far from the emperor's gaze, they learned how to live without adornment, without perfume, without the sound of their own names spoken with affection. They rose with the sun. They knelt in silence. They swept floors clean of petals they no longer dared to admire. And in time, they forgot the faces of those who had once stood beside them, whispering hopes into the soft dark. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to vanish while still breathing, to still move through days and nights, but as though your existence has been gently folded into a corner the world no longer looks at, to wake knowing there is no one nowhere thinking of you anymore? That was exile, soft, slow, complete. But not every woman was sent away. Some remained, hidden in corners of the palace where no visitors came, where footsteps rarely echoed, where silence pressed heavy against the walls. These were the women left behind, the ones who had aged beyond notice, the ones whose names no longer mattered in rooms where power shifted like sand. They lived in small chambers with fading tapestries, tended plants no one else cared for, fed cats who never forgot them. They stitched robes they would never wear. They brewed tea they would drink alone. They watched seasons change through windows. No one opened for them anymore. Have you ever known what it is to lose a place without anyone needing to tell you it's gone, to sense it in the way people stop asking, in the way doors close more softly now, in the way your voice seems unnecessary, your presence optional? That was silence, a quiet undoing, an erasure written not in ink, but in absence. And yet, even here, even in these smallest, loneliest corners, they survived. Not loudly, not triumphantly, but completely. They found small comforts, the warmth of a sunbeam falling across an old wooden floor, the soft fur of a sleeping cat, the slow satisfaction of thread pulled smooth through fabric, the way tea tastes when no one is there to watch you drink it. No one sang for these women. No one wrote poems. But they endured. And isn't that, in its own quiet way, a kind of victory? Have you ever held on to yourself when the world seemed determined to let you go? Have you ever whispered to your own heart, I am still here, even when no one else remembers? That's what they did. The exiled, the forgotten, the women who lived on long after anyone wondered how. They folded their days into neat shapes, into habits, into small rituals that tethered them gently to the world. They wrapped themselves in patience, in quiet, in threads of memory, too soft for anyone else to hold. And somewhere deep beneath all that silence, they carried a truth no decree could strip from them, that they had lived, that they had loved, that they had survived, even when no one noticed. Behind the red doors, exile and silence were the endings most often written for women. But not all endings are defeats. Not all lives need to be loud to have mattered. Some found peace there. Some found strength. Some found a kind of freedom strange as it sounds in being forgotten. Because in forgetting, there is space. And in space, there is room sometimes for the softest part of yourself to breathe again. And isn't that a story worth telling too? Not the grand ones, not the glorious ones, but the quiet ones, the still ones, the ones that remind us that even in silence, a life holds meaning. Even in exile, a woman can remain her own. Are you still here with me, my dear? Still resting, still letting your heart slow down beneath the softness of this quiet story? I wonder if you could sit across from one of these women, one of those who lived behind the red doors. What would you ask her? What wisdom would you hope she might share with you softly, like a secret passed from hand to hand in the safety of night? Because they did have lessons for us, these women who lived so long beneath silk and silence. Not written down in books, not stitched into the hems of history, but tucked carefully into the way they carried themselves, into the way they endured, into the way they survived things no one outside those walls would ever fully understand. You see, these women learned in their long, quiet lives that not every victory is loud. Not every survival looks like strength. Sometimes survival looks like smallness, looks like patience, looks like knowing when to lower your gaze, when to hold your tongue, when to let go of battles you cannot win. Have you ever been taught that silence can be a shield? That waiting is not weakness, but endurance, stretched thin across the bones of hope? They would have told you, if they could, that life is not always fair, that you can be good and kind and still overlooked, that you can be clever and capable and still forgotten, that beauty fades, favor drifts, power belongs too often to those who deserve it least. And yet, you must find ways to keep something of yourself alive. They would have taught you how to look for the small things, the moments no one else notices. A flower blooming in a neglected garden, the warmth of sun across cool stone, the way tea tastes when brewed just right, when held in hands that remember how to appreciate stillness. Because these are the things that tether us to ourselves. These are the things no emperor can take from you, no decree can erase. Have you ever needed reminding that your worth isn't written in titles, that your softness doesn't make you small, that patience isn't surrender, it's simply a quieter kind of courage? They knew. These women, they knew how to bend without breaking, how to bow without losing the thread of who they were, how to stitch their hearts back together quietly, without anyone seeing the seams. They would tell you, hold yourself gently, speak softly to your own heart, forgive yourself the days you feel invisible, the moments you long to scream, but only sigh. Rest when you need to, laugh when you can, love even if it hurts. Because isn't that what makes us human? Not our triumphs, not our loud victories, but our capacity to keep loving, to keep hoping, even when the world gives us little reason to. They might tell you, do not envy those who rise quickly. Do not chase after things that vanish with time. What matters, what truly lasts, is often quieter than you think. Kindness, grace, the way you treat those who have nothing to offer you in return, the softness you carry even when the world has tried to harden you. Have you ever wished someone had taught you these things sooner? That someone had sat beside you beneath lantern light and said, you don't have to win to be worthy. You don't have to speak to be heard by yourself. You don't have to shine for anyone else's gaze to matter. That's what these women would whisper to you if they could. That survival is enough. That quiet is enough. That you, just as you are enough. And isn't that the lesson we forget too easily in a world that asks us to be more, to do more, to take up space loudly? Isn't it a gentle kind of rebellion to simply remain, to remain soft, to remain kind, to remain yourself? Behind the red doors, they learned this the hard way, but we can learn it more gently. We can choose softness before the world demands it from us. We can honor their quiet lives by remembering what they endured to teach us. Hold on to yourself, my dear. Even on the days you feel small, even on the days you are overlooked, even on the days no one speaks your name, because you, still breathing, still hoping, still loving in the smallest of ways, are writing a story too. And that story matters. Are you still here, my dear? Still listening, still safe, still warm beneath your blanket, letting the quiet settle into your bones like soft light at the end of a long day? I hope so, because this is the part I want you to hear the most. You see, there's something I've been meaning to tell you, something those women behind the red doors never got to hear. Something they might have whispered to themselves in the quietest parts of night but never dared believe. You are free, truly, quietly, beautifully, free. You are not locked behind lacquered gates. You are not bound by rules written in someone else's hand. You are not waiting for footsteps in the dark, not for summons, not for approval, not for the soft rustle of silk that says, "Tonight you matter." You already matter. You already belong to yourself. You are already enough. Have you let yourself feel that lately? Let it sink in soft and slow, like tea, warming your hands through porcelain. You don't have to earn your place by being lovely. You don't have to hold your breath waiting to be chosen. You don't have to shrink. You don't have to wait. You can choose. You can speak. You can rest. You can leave. You can love. You can stay. You are free. I wonder how many women through history would have traded everything they had just to taste what you hold so lightly, the ability to walk where you wish, to sleep beneath a sky that belongs to no man, to wake without wondering whether today your name will be called or forgotten. Freedom is quiet sometimes. It doesn't always come with fireworks or banners or grand declarations. Sometimes it looks like a cup of tea poured just for yourself, like a room you can lock from the inside, like laughter that doesn't have to ask permission to exist. Have you let yourself feel grateful for that? Not with guilt, not with shame for the women who came before, but with tenderness, with softness, with the kind of reverence that lights a candle and lets it burn, simply because you can. They couldn't. Those women behind the red doors, they couldn't leave. They couldn't choose. They couldn't write their own stories in ink that wouldn't be washed away. But you are writing yours every day, with every step you take freely, with every breath that doesn't tremble in fear, with every time you laugh loudly without glancing over your shoulder to see who might frown. You are free, free to forgive yourself, free to rest, free to love who you love, how you love, as long as you love. Free to say no, free to say yes, free to change, free to begin again. Isn't that a kind of quiet miracle? One we forget to notice, one we forget to celebrate. You don't have to be perfect to deserve it. You don't have to be extraordinary. You only have to be here, alive, breathing, choosing each day in small ways to be kind to yourself. That is freedom. So tonight, before you close your eyes, before sleep carries you somewhere softer than thought, let yourself feel it. You are free. You are not locked behind someone else's expectations. You are not measured only by what you produce, what you please, what you sacrifice. You are measured by your softness, your kindness, your tenderness with the world and with yourself. That is enough. They never heard those words, those women behind the red doors. But you can. You have. And maybe, just maybe, by living a little more gently, a little more freely, you honor them. You carry them forward in the way you care for yourself, in the way you refuse to disappear, in the way you choose joy, even when the world tells you to choose less. So, rest now. Breathe deep. Let go. Tomorrow is waiting, and you are free to walk toward it in your own time, in your own way. Sleep well, my dear. You are free. You are free. You are free.